Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by White House reporter Haisten Willis. Haisten, President Biden came under a little bit of fire for not wanting to visit the border when he was in a border state, said there were more important things going on. What are we talking about with regard, it's been a big issue for Biden really throughout his term. Is he maybe a little bit emboldened by the midterm elections?
Yeah, we'll see. It's been a big issue for Biden if you ask Republicans. They would certainly tell you that that's a big issue for Biden. Obviously, we got Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Arizona Governor, outgoing Governor Doug Ducey, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, all sending these volunteer migrants into major cities, what they consider liberal enclaves. All that's an attempt to get headlines about this and make this a big deal. Biden, I think, would tell you that it's not a big deal, which is exactly what he said the other day. He was traveling to Phoenix to do a factory tour and talk about manufacturing in America, something he talks about a lot. He happened to be only about 100 miles from the border and decided not to visit. He hasn't visited since he's been in office, and he was asked why he's not going to visit. He said there's more important things going on. So that's obviously his perspective. This isn't that big of a deal, despite what the Republicans would say otherwise.
Now, there are some Democrats, though, from border states who've raised this as a concern. I mean, you certainly have Henry Cuellar, who was recently reelected, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly from the very state that the president was visiting, has raised the border as an issue in his successful reelection race. So there is some bipartisan concern.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I guess there's a regional nature to this. If you live in Texas or Arizona in like a border community, you're going to be more concerned about it, whether you're a Democrat or not. I believe that the Democratic mayor of El Paso, another border city, has talked about this. But Biden, really, for the most part, has not really talked about it a whole lot. Again, I thought it was kind of telling. He said that there were more important things going on than he's visiting the border, even when he was already just 100 miles away. I talked to an analyst about this. I mean, I've talked to several, but one comment that's kind of stuck with me is analyst told me that Biden has decided he'd rather get beat up by the right about this issue than get beat up by the left on this issue. Obviously, President Trump had very strong immigration stances. He was attacked pretty strongly about that, although praised by people on the other side, of course. But even Barack Obama, Biden's former boss, was labeled the deporter-in-chief back in 2014. So I think Biden may be really wary. If he's seen as going strong on the border at all, he'll get all this other pressure from the other side on the left pretty instantly. And the calculation he may have made is just to simply let that go. And as you said, with the midterms, Democrats did pretty well. They only lost, I think, 9 seats in the House, actually gained a seat in the Senate. So what he's done so far was not really, I guess, punished or rebutted by voters. So he may choose to actually double down and kind of do more of the same during the next 2 years.
So we received some good news with the Biden administration concluding an agreement to free Brittany Griner, the basketball player who's been detained in Russia. But shortly after the terms of that deal were announced, some people started asking tougher questions about whether it was a good deal for the United States. What is the controversy?
Yeah, Brittany Griner, of course, had been detained in Russia since February on charges of, I believe it was bringing marijuana cartridges, vape cartridges, into the country. But she received an extremely harsh sentence for what seems like a minor crime. I think it was about 10 years. They announced Thursday morning that she would be released, which, of course, is the good news. And they tried to kind of bill it as good news. They released pictures. Brittany Griner's wife, I believe it was in the Oval Office. They held a press conference making it a celebration. However, when the terms of the deal were kind of analyzed, it's definitely proven to be controversial. The United States is giving up Victor Bout, who is considered the merchant of death, sold arms to shady characters all over the world. He sold AK-47s to people who, the way it was presented by a reporter, was knowing that they could be used to kill Americans and American drug enforcement agents. So again, Thursday morning, the administration tried to bill this as a good thing, but there was an afternoon press conference that they do almost every day where White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre faced a series of tough questions about the deal.
Well, in addition to who was released in exchange for Brittany Griner, there was someone, an American, who was considered wrongfully detained, left behind.
Right, exactly, and that is Paul Whelan, who was a detained former Marine. There were reports about this deal, I guess back in like late summer, that were about this, that it may be Victor Bout in exchange for Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. And most of the press I read about that even said that was not a deal that the U.S. should take. And in the end, they took a deal that exchanged Bout for Griner, not even including Paul Whelan. So there's already statements, of course, release from Whelan's family about their disappointment, I believe, from him raising his frustration and disappointment at not being included in the deal. And then there were other questions as well. One of the biggest was sort of this idea of like a magnet effect. If we kind of reward Russia, so to speak, for detaining Griner and then getting someone they want in exchange, does that encourage Vladimir Putin or another type of figure to kidnap or take hostage more Americans and try to use that as a negotiating chip?
Right. So you mentioned earlier the midterm elections and how the Democrats actually gained a seat in the Senate after the Georgia runoff election. Talk a little bit about what that could mean for President Biden. I mean, it does give him a little bit of breathing room in that chamber, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the biggest things is he'll be able to get his nominees through.
Right.
If he's trying to get people through the Senate, he wants to convince as many Republicans to go for it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest things, of course, is if a if a Supreme Court seat
Sure.
came open, he would be able to get that through. Without having to worry about what Republicans think of it.
Maybe not even worry about what Joe Manchin thinks about it.
Yeah, and exactly. That's kind of like the second biggest thing is that Manchin is no longer the most powerful man in Washington, which he sort of kind of was for the last 2 years. Everything kind of ran through him. If Manchin didn't approve of it, then it didn't go through, which is, gave him a lot of power. But he was also under a lot of pressure and stress. So he had a lot of attention. He had a lot of protesters. He has a houseboat he actually goes out on sometimes on the weekends, and he even had protesters coming up in like kayaks to his houseboat to try to get his attention and get them to vote for bills that they wanted. So I was actually reading a story a minute ago with an interview from Manchin saying he himself was actually very relieved to not have to be under quite so much pressure. So yeah, Democrats can now convince the other 50 senators, the other 50 Democratic senators to go for something without Manchin being quite so powerful anymore.
So smooth sailing now for Joe Manchin?
We will see.
Thank you, Haisten. You can read Haisten and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.